It does help, and we're very grateful for this opportunity.
Behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, power is rarely claimed with grand declarations. It is signaled in whisper-quiet gestures. In an extraordinary breach of unspoken protocol, Princess Anne did what many thought unthinkable, placing a historic royal tiara directly onto the head of young Princess Charlotte. For the Princess Royal, it was a bold passing of the torch, a firm endorsement of the dynasty's direct lineage and ultimate future. As the room held its breath, one shadow lengthened across the glittering hall. Queen Camilla, sidelined by a move that reasserted the core royal bloodline, found herself strikingly isolated. Today we uncover the hidden rift, the decisive gesture, and the dramatic shifting tides within the House of Windsor. The unwritten law broken in the Bow Room. On May 9, 2026, senior family members gathered inside the Bow Room at Buckingham Palace. Silver tea services sat on low mahogany tables, while senior staff stood quietly near the tall bay windows. The mood was supposed to be strictly informal, arranged as a brief family gathering before a busy week of official engagements. Princess Anne walked into the room carrying a faded red velvet case, moving with purposeful, deliberate steps toward the center of the tea party. She did not set the box on the side table, nor did she hand it over to a waiting footman. Instead, she walked right past Queen Camilla without making eye contact or offering the customary polite greeting. She stopped directly in front of 11-year-old Princess Charlotte, who was sitting quietly on one of the room's high-backed armchairs. Anne unlatched the brass box, revealing a historic diamond-festooned tiara, closely tied to the Spencer family line. In the British monarchy, an unwritten rule dictates that young princesses never wear tiaras in public or private. They are expected to wait until their wedding day, or until they reach full adulthood to attend state banquets. Anne ignored that centuries-old tradition completely as she lifted the heavy diamond piece out of its silk lining. She leaned down and placed the glittering tiara directly onto Charlotte's head, securing it firmly into her hair. The room went completely cold as the weight of the moment registered with everyone present. Camilla froze with her porcelain teacup halfway to her lips, staring at the Princess Royal in absolute disbelief. King Charles turned around from the window, watching his sister with a look of stunned hesitation. Prince William and Princess Catherine stood just 2 feet away, making no effort to stop Anne or shield their young daughter. Anne adjusted the diamond frame on Charlotte's hair with calm, practiced hands. She did not ask for the king's permission, nor did she offer a single word of explanation to the queen consort. This was no playful grandmotherly gesture or accidental breach of court etiquette. It was a calculated demonstration of authority executed directly in front of the entire royal household staff and family circle. As Anne pulled her hands back, a small folded piece of paper slipped out from under the velvet lining inside the box. It fell onto the thick carpet right near William's shoes, catching the light from the tall bay windows. William casually stepped forward, picked up the note without a word, and slid it deep inside his tailored jacket pocket. Camilla's eyes followed the small paper, her face hardening as she realized what was happening. For months, quiet tension had been building behind palace doors over the management of the royal collection. Tiaras, brooches, and historic necklaces are far more than decorative pieces of jewelry to the institution. They represent physical symbols of authority, direct royal lineage, and public prestige across generations. When Queen Elizabeth passed away, access to these private vaults became a quiet, fierce battleground among senior members. Camilla had been working diligently to centralize the entire collection under her direct personal oversight. She wanted a formal committee established to decide which family members wore specific pieces for public events. Anne saw things very differently, firmly believing that personal heirlooms belonged strictly to the bloodline. She maintained that these historic treasures were reserved for the late Queen's direct female descendants, completely separate from court politics. By placing that tiara on Charlotte, Anne was drawing an unmistakable line in the sand. She was signaling to the household that Camilla's authority over the family heritage had very real, strict limits. Charlotte looked up at her father without fidgeting or reaching up to touch the diamonds resting on her head. The 11-year-old sat perfectly still, absorbing the heavy, awkward silence that filled the vast room. Camilla finally set her teacup down on its saucer with a sharp, echoing click that cut through the silence. She looked directly at Charles, silently demanding that he step in and exercise his royal authority. The king looked at the brilliant tiara resting on his granddaughter's head, then looked back at his sister. He opened his mouth as if to intervene, but no words came out, and he turned back toward the window. Camilla was left standing entirely on her own, isolated in the center of the drawing room. No one spoke for nearly 30 seconds, while the grand clock near the fireplace ticked loudly in the background. Anne smoothed down her gloves and looked at Camilla for the first time since entering the space. She offered no apology, stepping back to join William and Catherine by the velvet sofa. The message was blindingly clear to every royal courtier and family member standing inside the room. The royal jewels were not Camilla's to manage, hoard, or distribute at her personal discretion. The future of the British monarchy was already sitting in that room, wearing diamonds kept far out of the queen consort's reach. William reached into his coat to touch the folded note, fully aware of the storm it was about to unleash. Red velvet, locked vaults, and a mother's forgotten legacy. 3 months before the tea party in the bow room, a heavy iron key turned inside a lock deep beneath Windsor Castle. The time was 8 in the morning on February 14th, 2026. Cold air filled the underground corridor as Princess Anne stepped into the main vault, accompanied by Sir Alistair Denholm, the senior keeper of the Royal Archives. The room smelled of old leather, polished brass, and damp stone walls. Floor-to-ceiling steel cabinets lined the perimeter, housing centuries of sovereign property. Anne walked directly to cabinet number 4, where personal items belonging to Queen Elizabeth were stored. She held a ring of heavy keys, but she did not need to guess which one to use. For 12 weeks, routine vault audit logs had shown unusual gaps in recording. Pages were missing from the physical sign in ledger kept near the blast doors. Someone had been accessing the private personal storage drawers without filing the required court registry forms. The missing entries pointed toward administrative orders originating directly from Clarence House. Anne pulled open a heavy steel drawer labeled with gold lettering. Inside lay velvet-lined trays containing diamond brooches, pearl chokers, and historic tiaras. Several empty slots stared back at her from the gray felt. A rare sapphire pin was missing, along with 2 diamond bracelets historically linked to Princess Diana. Sir Alistair stood near the doorway, holding a leather-bound inventory ledger from 1981. He checked the historical entries against the physical trays inside the cabinet. The inventory list confirmed that those specific pieces had been set aside decades ago as personal gifts rather than state property. They were meant to follow the direct bloodline, bypassing official crown ownership completely. Anne reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the folded note William had later retrieved from the carpet. It was a signed memorandum written in 2021 by the late Queen herself. The ink was slightly faded, but the sovereign's signature at the bottom remained sharp and clear. The document outlined a strict, binding codicil regarding the personal estate. The memorandum explicitly named Princess Charlotte as the primary heir to several key pieces in the private collection. It specified that these items were to remain locked away until Charlotte turned 11 years old. At that milestone, full physical stewardship was to pass directly to her, completely free from any oversight by a sitting queen consort. Camilla had been pushing a very different agenda behind closed doors. She had hired a private jewelry consultant to recatalog every asset stored across Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace. Her goal was to consolidate all historic items under a single royal heritage trust. That structure would give the reigning monarch's spouse ultimate veto power over who could wear the collection. When Anne discovered the missing inventory entries, she did not raise the alarm with court security. She did not confront Camilla in a public hallway or send formal legal letters through the Lord Chamberlain's office. Instead, she quietly initiated her own audit under her authority as Colonel of the Blues and Royals. She spent 3 weeks cross-referencing vault access cards with security camera footage from the subterranean corridors. The footage revealed that private aides acting on Camilla's verbal instructions had entered the vault 4 separate times. They had moved key pieces from Cabinet 4 into a private holding safe near the upper apartments. Anne acted with swift surgical precision to stop the transfer. She used her personal master key to open the holding safe, retrieved the diamond festoon tiara, and placed it inside her own velvet travel case. She then locked Cabinet 4 and officially updated the vault registry under her own signature. Sir Alistair watched as Anne signed the master ledger in bold black ink. By recording the transfer personally, she effectively blocked any further attempts to reclassify the jewels through administrative channels. The paper trail was now legally secure, resting under the direct authority of the king's sister. Yet one major question remained unresolved as Anne locked the heavy vault door behind her. The memorandum signed in 2021 mentioned a second sealed envelope hidden inside the archives at Sandringham House. That second document contained specific instructions regarding Diana's personal wedding gifts, pieces that had completely vanished from official court records years earlier. Anne knew that securing the tiara in the vault was only the first step in protecting her mother's true legacy. Camilla's team was already drafting new policy guidelines to present to the king later that month. If those guidelines passed, every private codicil signed before 2022 could be declared legally null and void. As Anne walked back up the stone staircase toward the courtyard, she carried the red velvet case tightly under her arm. The clock in the Edward Tower struck 9 as she crossed the gravel driveway toward her waiting vehicle. She had secured the physical diamonds, but the battle for control over the family's history was just beginning. Camilla's quiet monopoly meets the Princess Royal's reckoning. Rain poured over the gardens of Highgrove House on the evening of April the 28th, 2026. Inside the private dining room, steam rose from a silver soup tureen placed in the center of the long mahogany table. Sir Michael Stevens, keeper of the Privy Purse, sat near the foot of the table with a thick leather folder resting on his lap. Camilla sat at the head of the table, holding a silver pen. She tapped the end of the pen against a drafted document titled, "The Royal Collection Heritage Reform." The proposal laid out new rules for loaning historical items to family members. Under the new terms, all requests for tiaras, brooches, and state gifts had to go through a central panel. Camilla would act as permanent chair of that panel. Any piece not currently assigned to an active royal working role would automatically revert to the central state inventory. Charles sat across from his wife, quietly cutting his poultry. He had approved the initial draft 2 weeks earlier, treating it as a routine administrative cleanup. He believed the move would reduce security costs and streamline insurance filings across the estates. Anne sat to the king's right, wearing her daily tweed jacket. She had not touched her dinner. She kept her hands folded over a single page of handwritten notes brought from her office at St. James's Palace. Camilla cleared her throat and looked around the table. She stated that the reform would bring modern transparency to the family's assets. She noted that private personal holdings created unnecessary confusion during international state visits. Anne leaned forward, placing her elbows firmly on the polished wood. She asked Camilla directly about the status of the private items gifted to Princess Diana in 1981. She wanted to know if those specific pieces were listed on the new central inventory schedule. The room grew noticeably quiet except for the sound of rain hitting the tall terrace glass. Sir Michael adjusted his glasses and shifted in his seat. He opened his folder to page 12, where the private family codicils were summarized. Camilla replied calmly that all items within the sovereign vaults fell under the new management framework. She argued that historical context mattered more than personal sentiment when protecting the crown's visual identity. She added that junior members of the family had no practical need for high-value tiaras before reaching official adulthood. Anne pulled a black fountain pen from her pocket. She drew a thick line through the header on Camilla's draft document. She stated clearly that personal family gifts were never state property. She reminded the room that the late Queen had established clear boundaries regarding bloodline heirlooms. Charles set his fork down on the porcelain plate with a soft thud. He looked between his wife and his sister. He knew that Anne held copies of every private legal trust signed before the monarch's passing. Camilla pointed out that as Queen Consort, her duty was to safeguard the total collection for the nation. She argued that allowing individual family branches to hold private caches of historical jewels fragmented the monarchy's public image. She insisted the committee proposal move forward for formal ratification by the Lord Chamberlain. Anne did not raise her voice. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small black and white photograph taken at Kensington Palace in 1992. The photograph showed a young Princess Diana sitting at her writing desk, surrounded by personal jewelry boxes bearing her private crest. Anne slid the photograph across the table, stopping it right beside Camilla's silver pen. She told Camilla that those boxes contained items purchased with private funds, not state allowances. She noted that any attempt to reclassify those pieces as public state property was legally invalid. Camilla glanced down at the photograph for a brief second. Her expression hardened instantly. She dropped her pen onto the table and stood up from her chair, pushing her linen napkin into her water goblet. She stated that she would not discuss internal administrative policies under threat of historical personal grievances. She turned on her heel and walked out through the double doors leading toward the main library. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind her, leaving the three remaining people in complete silence. Charles rubbed his forehead with his right hand. He looked at Sir Michael and asked whether the legal team at Farrer & Co. had reviewed the 1981 trust agreements. The keeper of the privy purse confirmed that those original documents remain legally binding and untouched by recent parliamentary acts. Anne picked up her single page of notes and folded it neatly. She told her brother that Camilla was attempting to build a public monopoly over items she had no legal right to control. She warned him that pushing the reform further would create an open rift with William and Catherine. Charles did not defend the draft policy. He asked Sir Michael to pause all formal discussions regarding the central panel until after the summer court schedule. He then stood up, excused himself, and followed his wife toward the library wing. Sir Michael closed his leather folder and looked across the table at the Princess Royal. He asked her what she intended to do with the physical items currently stored under her personal vault authority. Anne stood up and buttoned her tweed jacket. She looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. She told Sir Michael that the physical items would be delivered directly to their rightful owner on the exact date specified by her mother's final instructions. She did not elaborate on what that date was or where the handover would take place. She picked up her fountain pen and walked out into the central hallway, leaving Sir Michael alone in the dining room with the cold dinner service. The meeting at Highgrove was over, but the administrative maneuver had failed completely. Camilla had tried to claim authority through official policy, but Anne had blocked her using simple, unassailable legal facts. As Anne's car pulled out of the driveway into the dark Gloucestershire night, her driver received a short-coded radio message from the security detail at Adelaide Cottage. Prince William was waiting for her update, and the next step of their plan was already set for May. Yet one major obstacle remained in their path. Queen Camilla still held the official keys to the main display cases inside the picture gallery, where several secondary pieces were set to be catalogued for the upcoming summer tour. Anne knew that if those secondary pieces were locked into the public exhibition cases, retrieving them for Charlotte would require an act of Parliament. She needed to strike before the formal catalogue went to print, and she had already chosen the exact moment to make her move. Why Princess Anne chose the 9th of May. On May 4th, 2026, a black courier pouch arrived at the private security desk at Gatcombe Park. Inside lay an advanced layout proof of the official Royal Collection Trust summer catalogue. The glossy cover showed a high-resolution photograph of the historic diamond festoon tiara, listed as Item 42 on page 68. The caption beneath the image described the piece as sovereign property on loan to the state, scheduled for permanent display in the picture gallery starting May 15th. Below the description sat a single sign, offline signed in blue ink by Lord Chamberlain, approving the catalogue for global printing. Anne looked at the printed page under her desk lamp. If those catalogues went to print on May 10th, the tiara would legally enter the public state register. Once registered, withdrawing the item would require a formal motion through the Privy Council, giving Camilla total leverage over its future use. Anne picked up her landline phone and dialed a direct line to Adelaide Cottage. William answered on the second ring. She informed him that the printing presses at Windsor Castle Press were scheduled to start running at midnight on May 9th. They had less than 5 days to act. The 9th of May was not chosen at random for the tea gathering in the Bow Room. It was the exact final deadline before the summer exhibition. Inventory became legally binding under Crown property law. Furthermore, May 9th held deep historical weight within the family trust records. On that exact date in 2002, Queen Elizabeth II signed the Balmoral Trust Codicil, a private legal instrument governing the distribution of non-state heirlooms. That document explicitly stated that any personal heirloom assigned to a direct descendant at birth must be physically delivered into their possession before any state exhibition filing. By presenting the tiara to Charlotte on May 9th, Anne was executing the precise terms of that 24-year-old trust document. the timing caught Camilla's strategy team entirely off guard. They had assumed Anne would voice her objections through formal letters, or challenge the catalog draft during the upcoming estate board meeting on May 12th. Instead, Anne bypassed every administrative channel. By executing the physical transfer inside the Bow Room on May 9th, she altered the legal status of the tiara hours before the printing presses fired up. When the news of the Bow Room incident reached the Royal Collection Trust offices at 6 o'clock that evening, Senior Curator Edward Harcourt immediately halted the printing order for page 68. Item 42 had to be pulled from the public registry entirely. William and Catherine stood fully united behind Anne throughout the tactical maneuver. When William retrieved the folded note from the floor during the tea party, he was securing the original receipt from the Balmoral Trust codicil, bearing his grandmother's personal seal. Camilla realized too late that she had been checkmated without a single raised voice. She had relied on court bureaucracy to quietly claim the jewels, but Anne had countered with ironclad family law and absolute tactical timing. Yet, as the catalog printing halted, a new question surfaced among the court officials watching the fallout. The Balmoral Trust codicil mentioned 3 distinct velvet cases stored under the same private registration numbers. Anne had delivered the first case containing the festoon tiara, but the location of the remaining 2 velvet boxes remained completely unknown, even to the senior keepers of the royal vaults. The stolen glances at the high table. Silver cutlery clinked softly against fine bone china inside the state dining room at Buckingham Palace. 30 guests sat along the polished mahogany table under massive crystal chandeliers. Nobody spoke above a low murmur. Every eye drifted instinctively toward the southern end of the long table. 11-year-old Princess Charlotte sat upright between her parents. The historic diamond festoon tiara rested securely in her dark hair, catching the yellow glow of the candlelights. She cut her roast lamb with steady, precise movements, showing no sign of nervousness. Queen Camilla sat 3 seats down on the opposite side of the table. She stared straight ahead at her crystal water goblet, refusing to look across the space. Her posture was rigid. She held a silver napkin tightly in her left hand, her knuckles turning pale under the bright overhead lights. King Charles sat at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on his plate. He pushed a small piece of potato around with his fork without eating it. He knew that every courtier in the room was tracking the silent power struggle playing out between his wife and his sister. Princess Anne sat near the center, speaking quietly with the Bishop of London. She maintained a calm, neutral expression, occasionally nodding at the bishop's remarks while ignoring the tension radiating from the far end of the table. Senior courtiers whispered behind cupped hands. Secretaries and advisors exchanged glances, fully aware that the traditional hierarchy had fractured right before their eyes. The unspoken rule governing royal regalia had been broken, and the entire institution was forced to recalibrate its understanding of who held real influence. Charlotte reached up briefly to adjust her fork. The diamonds on her head glittered sharply against the dark wood paneling of the walls. It was an image straight out of a bygone era, recalling the quiet dignity of the late sovereign who had planned every detail of this generational handoff years prior. Camilla shifted in her seat. She cleared her throat loudly, attempting to draw attention and command the room's focus back to her. A few junior aides glanced her way, but the senior family members kept their gaze firmly forward. Prince William looked down the table directly at Camilla. He did not smile or nod. His expression remained completely flat, signaling that the barrier protecting his daughter was absolute and unyielding. Just before the dessert course was served, Anne leaned over toward Charlotte. She did not raise her voice, but the silence around the table was so absolute that several guests nearby caught the exact words spoken. Anne whispered into the young princess's ear, telling her that this was always her rightful place. Charlotte gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, her face remaining composed as she looked directly at the candlelight, reflecting in the polished silver. That short exchange sent a clear message down the line. The bloodline had asserted its claim over the family's personal heritage, bypassing the official court bureaucracy entirely. Camilla's attempts to centralize the collection under her office had hit a permanent, immovable wall. Plates were cleared away by silent footmen in red livery. The heavy doors at the end of the hall remained closed, sealing the dining room off from the rest of the palace corridors. No one dared to bring up the tiara, yet the metallic glitter of the diamonds dominated every conversation happening beneath the surface. As the dinner wound down, Charles motioned quietly to his personal secretary, Mark Thompson. He instructed him to cancel the morning briefing scheduled for 10 o'clock at Clarence House. Camilla noticed the whispered instruction. She set her dessert spoon down onto her plate with a sharp, deliberate sound that echoed across the quiet room. She pushed her chair back, excused herself without offering a single farewell to the table, and walked out through the side doors. The remaining guests watched her leave in total silence. Charles did not stand up to follow her. He remained seated, staring down at the empty spot where his wife had been sitting moments before. The dining room slowly emptied as guests filtered out toward the drawing rooms for after-dinner coffee. William and Catherine walked side by side, with Charlotte stepping between them, the diamond tiara still gleaming in her hair as she exited the hall. Anne lingered behind for a moment, checking her watch under the chandelier light. She walked over to the sideboard, picked up a small silver program card, and slid it into her pocket. The evening had accomplished every objective she had set out to achieve when she unlocked the vault at Windsor weeks earlier. Yet, beneath the quiet triumph of the dinner table, a lingering detail remained unresolved. The second velvet case mentioned in the Balmoral Trust codicil was still missing from the inventory logs. As Anne stepped out into the grand hallway, her security detail handed her a secure phone, showing a new message from Sandringham House. The second box had finally been located in an uncatalogued floor safe beneath the library, and someone had already tried to open it. An 11-year-old heiress and the shift in royal power. At 11 o'clock that same night, King Charles walked down the carpeted corridor toward the private sitting room in the West Wing. The palace was quiet, save for the muffled footsteps of night watchmen patrolling the outer perimeter. He pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and found Princess Anne sitting at a small writing desk, reviewing estate documents under a single brass reading lamp. Charles sat down in a leather armchair opposite her desk. He rested his hands on his knees and looked at his sister. He asked her directly whether the public presentation of the festoon tiara was entirely necessary to protect the estate's legal standing. Anne set her pen down beside her notes. She opened a leather binder and pulled out a certified copy of the Balmoral Trust codicil, signed in 2002. She handed the document directly across the desk to her brother. The document carried the official seal of the sovereign, verified by the High Court of Justice in London. Clause 4 explicitly named Princess Charlotte as the immediate personal custodian of the Spencer family heirlooms upon reaching her 11th birthday. The text stated that physical possession must occur within 90 days of the milestone to prevent the assets from falling under Crown state ownership. Charles read the clause twice in silence. The legal reality was undeniable. The codicil was signed long before his marriage to Queen Camilla, making it legally superior to any recent administrative decrees drafted by Clarence House. Anne pointed to the bottom of the page where Prince William had signed as a designated witness. She explained that if the family had waited until the summer exhibition catalog was printed, the trust would have breached its own terms. That failure would have given the state treasury legal grounds to tax or impound the collection. Charles closed the folder and rested his arms on the desk. He admitted that he had not been fully briefed on the specific conditions written into the 2002 codicil. He had relied on advice from court administrators who viewed the jewels purely as public exhibits rather than personal property. Anne reminded him that personal property belongs to the bloodline, not the office. She stated firmly that the family's future stability depended on maintaining clear boundaries between personal inheritance and state property. Down the hallway, inside the private family apartments, Charlotte stood before a tall oval mirror in her bedroom. Princess Catherine stood behind her, gently unclasping the diamond festoon tiara from her daughter's hair. Charlotte did not complain about the long evening or the heavy diamonds. She placed the tiara back inside its silk lining with steady, careful hands. The young princess had shown total composure throughout the high-tension dinner, sitting straight while adult rivalries played out around her. Catherine closed the velvet lid and locked the brass latch with a tiny key. She handed the key directly to William, who placed it inside an iron key box on his nightstand. William stepped out into the hallway and walked down toward the king's sitting room. He entered without knocking and stood beside Anne's chair. He looked at his father and stated that the family's private assets were now secured under the terms set by Queen Elizabeth. Charles looked at his son, then at his sister. The three of them sat together in the quiet room, bound by a shared understanding of institutional duty. Charles nodded slowly, acknowledging that the move was legally sound and morally right for the future of the house. The king stood up, picked up his walking stick, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he told Anne that the official catalog for the summer tour would be amended immediately. The festoon tiara would be listed as a private family loan rather than state property. With that single admission, the king officially validated his sister's actions and backed his granddaughter's rightful inheritance over his wife's administrative plans. The internal power struggle over the primary heirloom was officially over, resolved by cold legal facts and decisive action. Yet, as Charles exited into the hallway, William turned to Anne and brought up the urgent message received hours earlier from Norfolk. The security detail at Sandringham House had completed their inspection of the uncatalogued floor safe beneath the library. They confirmed that someone had used a master key code to attempt to access the second velvet case just 24 hours before the tea party in London. The safe remained locked, but the digital keypad recorded 3 failed authorization attempts, originating from a court-issued master fob. Anne stood up from her desk and locked the leather binder inside her briefcase. The initial maneuver in the bow room had succeeded in protecting Charlotte's tiara, but the unauthorized attempt to access Sandringham proved that the fight for the late Queen's secret archives was far from over. This quiet showdown inside the palace showed the world where true authority lies. Princess Anne made her move without raising her voice, and Queen Camilla was left with no response. The crown's future belongs to the next generation, and Princess Charlotte now carries that weight on her shoulders. Do you think Princess Anne was right to step in and protect Diana's legacy? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the British royal family.